I'm Gavin Clark with the National Museum of Computing and Reading Museum, and we're interviewing former employees and customers of Digital Equipment Corporation as part of the 60th anniversary of DEC opening its first office in the UK. It's December the 13th, 2023, and we are here in Reading. And I'm today talking to Ken Salmon. Ken, let's start with the basics, please. Tell us, please, your full name and your place and your year of birth.
My full name is Kenneth Andrew Salmon. I was born in Hong Kong in 1953.
Okay, and a little bit about your education. Where did you go to school, and what were your parents, what was your family sort of set up?
Well, my father was in Hong Kong because he was in the army, and he got taken prisoner by the Japanese on Christmas Day 1941. He spent 3.5 years as a prisoner of the Japanese. He came back to Hong Kong after the war and joined the Hong Kong government, where he was a prison officer. And as such, I came along and I went to junior school in Hong Kong. First of all, Quarry Bay Junior School, then Kowloon Junior School. And my secondary school was King George V School in Hong Kong. My parents at one stage decided it would be good for me to gain some independence, and they sent me for 2 years to a boarding school in the UK. That was not a great success, I have to say, and I went back to Hong Kong to do my A-levels at King George V School. I achieved 3 A-levels, maths, physics and chemistry, and I decided that I would go to the UK to try and study computers. They were the big in thing. I'm now talking about the year 1971. And very few universities offered a course in those days. Indeed, I went to the University of Essex, where computing was a very small part of the Department of Mathematical Studies, computing being considered just another calculator for the mathematicians. I graduated from Essex University after 3 years with a degree in computer science. And I have to say that Essex was a digital site. Almost all the computers on the campus were digital equipment machines, including the mainframe, which was I think at the time it was the largest DEC System 10 installation in the country. Consequently, towards the end of my 3rd year, I was interviewed by Digital. They seem to have, first choice of interviewing the students there. And I explained to them my 3rd year project, which was to make a computer or motherboard using one of the very latest microprocessor chips. It was 8-bit. In those days, it was a 8008, Intel 8008. And with a partner, we created this motherboard, well, what we know as a motherboard now. At the time, it was a full-blown computer. We could communicate with it. And the folks from DEC, 2 senior managers, Jeff Oates and John Atkins, said, "You're exactly the kind of person we're looking for." And consequently, I got a job offer, which I accepted, and I started work for the Computer Special Systems Division of Digital Equipment Company in Reading.
Okay, let's just stop. There's a few things in that. So computer science, you mentioned how computers were sort of not very well known about commodity at that time, that point in the world's history. You mentioned computer science, again, not widely practiced at university or certainly not at schools. Your computer science course sounds very practical and hands-on and constructive, as opposed to comp sci courses today are very much more around software and algorithms. Your course is very much more constructing physical hardware, it sounds like.
Well, that was a choice because the first 2 years in the computer science degree, the way it was structured was everybody did the same for the first 2 years. And then for the 3rd year, you could choose to specialize in either hardware or software. And I chose the hardware route.
Any reason for that?
I like tinkering with things, basically. software was something that I was okay at, but it never really turned me on, so to speak. So I was far more interested in putting together components and making things work rather than debugging software, which seemed a bit, well, didn't appeal to me.
Would you describe yourself as a bit of, is this your background, a bit of a fixer and maker?
Um, I suppose so. You know, I'm very old school, I'm afraid. At my age, you'd expect that. But I was the kind of guy I liked playing around with Meccano kits when I was a kid. And I used to make kind of soapbox cars, if you know what they are, and that kind of thing. So yeah, I was quite practical.
So you knew how to make things, and this really spoke to you. Building the hardware for a computer, of course, sounds very interesting. And tell us about the Intel 8080 chip. Was this a new thing at the time?
It was very new. It was the Intel 8008, which was the predecessor of the 8080. And then there was the 8086, 8186, 8286, 8386, and so on. But this was only an 8-bit one. And yeah.
Why was it exciting, this Intel chip?
The concept of a computer, and I'm now thinking DEC System 10 in an air-conditioned first floor suite, to have the power in a little chip on a little board was just mind-blowing. And you know, you could have memory, but the memory was so small. We thought 4K of memory was incredible, you know, and nowadays we think like 4 megs is nothing.
So what did you build then? So you built this motherboard. And what is a motherboard for people who aren't?
Okay, a motherboard is the 8008 chip is simply the processor. Now, to make a processor functional to do things, you need several other aspects to it. First and foremost, you need a clock. You need something to give it its rhythm, if you like. You need memory, okay, and you need the ability to take input and for it to give output. And so you have to design an input. In those days, it was like a telex machine. And the output, we could have one of these newfangled VDU screens, you know, and it was all very, very rudimentary compared to what we're used to today.
And you were soldering this stuff together, or how?
Yes, we were, and wire wrap as well.
What is wire wrap?
Wire wrap is basically the chip comes with a number of legs, and you plug the legs into a socket, and you solder the base of the socket with the circuit you want to go to it with wires. And all these are metal wires with normally yellow sleeves, and you strip one end and you literally wrap the stripped end around a pole that sticks out from the board. And you connect one point to another depending on what circuit you want to create. That they call it wire wrap because you literally wrap the wire around a pin.
And this is an easy or a hard thing to achieve?
I'd say it's a monotonous thing to do. You have to concentrate very hard. Fortunately, when I was at Digital, we had a wiring shop, and there were people who did that 24/7. But when I was at university, we had to wire everything up ourselves. And a lot of lessons can be learned that way, because there's the concept of something called crosstalk between wires that can be very destructive if you do it wrong. Form of interference, yes. It's electromagnetic interference.
So you built this motherboard, which we're in computers everyday computers and servers now, but obviously there were different proper things back then. DEC, why did DEC come to your campus? Obviously, you said it's a DEC shop. There's a lot of DEC computers at Essex University in Colchester. Why did they come to? Is it a normal thing to do every year, or is it a casual drop-in?
No, it was I think DEC considered it to be a captive DEC site. And everybody who went through the computer science course was familiar with DEC equipment and with DEC software. Okay, and as such, we would have a head start over any other starter at DEC because we were already familiar with the company and its products and its software. So it was only natural for DEC to come and interview the people at Essex.
Would they come an annual?
Every year, regular as clockwork.
And they came to recruit people?
They came to recruit people, yes. In fact, my predecessor at Digital was a lady called Lynn Gillen, and she was at Essex, and she moved on within DEC and created a vacancy which I came in to fill.
And would you, so DEC is doing this as a captive market. Do you think, did you get any, what DEC systems were you running at Essex? Were you just studying them? Were you supporting them as well? Or?
No. We were hands-on pretty much. The DEC System 10 was our, if you like, central mainframe, and we ran batch jobs on it. And by batch jobs, you literally programmed it using punched cards. You'd spend half the day typing in punch card machines to create the punch card, and you'd have a stack, you know, literally 3 or 4 inches thick that you would then submit, and it would be fed through a card reader into the DEC System 10. And the following day, you'd get the printout output from it. But programming-wise, we had PDP-15s with the old DEC tapes. Those were wonderful things to watch. And we also had PDP-11s and PDP-8s. PDP-8s, by that time, 1971, were becoming a bit old hat, but PDP-11s were the bee's knees. They were the brand new thing, and yes, I started my career. First 6 years of my career focused on PDP-11 hardware and software.
So what did so what happened? DEC liked what they saw. What was it about your work that I suppose impressed them? Did you ever find out?
Well, why they liked me, okay, was because I had been doing this hardware project, and they were looking for someone to join Computer Special Systems. Now, you have to understand, Computer Special Systems was a kind of, we call it a skunk works. And what that is a group of people who do things to, that are not standard products within the digital range. So if a customer came along and said, yeah, I want to buy your PDP-11 computer, but I need to have it interface to this special process control machine, Digital would say, yeah, we can do it, but we'd have to give the job to our special systems people. They will design and provide to you a bespoke, custom piece of hardware that will enable digital computers to connect to your specialist machine.
And so DEC are looking for someone to fill this role, what, an engineering role or a senior
engineering role?
So they want an engineer to do this.
An engineer, and I suppose my forte was logic design. I mean, we're going back to the days of AND gates, OR gates, you know, flip-flops and all that kind of stuff, which perhaps is meaningless to people these days, but still are the building blocks of the microprocessors of today.
So were you offered a position?
Yes.
Did they interview formally? How did it happen?
They interviewed me at the university. Then they invited me to Reading for a second interview. And then they made me a job offer. And I accepted, of course, because, you know, I knew all about digital.
Well, let's talk about that. So what do you know about digital? What made you interested in working for them? And how did you feel about you'd made this leap?
Well, when you go to Essex University, it's such a DEC site that, you know, the biggest computer company in the world, IBM, was a dirty word. So the last people you would want to go and work for would be IBM. It was just a cultural thing at the time. And at the time, digital marketed itself as the second largest computer company in the world. And so if you didn't go to work for IBM, the best company you can go and work for is Digital. Yeah, I felt that I was very fortunate to have gone to a university which was linked to Digital, and therefore it made it greased the wheels to enable me to join Digital.
Were you aware of them before Essex University, or was it Essex that opened your eyes to Digital?
I was aware of them before, but only in passing, as it were, because out in Hong Kong, when you talk to people about computers, they think A, IBM, B, ICL, because Hong Kong was a British Crown colony, and ICL was the British computer company, and so they had a lot of installations in Hong Kong. When I told friends and relatives I was working for Digital, a lot of them would say, who? But,
How did that make you feel? Did you think you were making the right move? Or?
Well, I consoled myself with the fact I knew what Digital was, and they didn't. And that was their problem, not mine.
And you said something very interesting earlier, which was you more or less had to queue to get an interview at Digital. Was it competitive, or was it just, were they selective?
I think Digital had first choice of who they wanted to interview. I think just about everybody must have applied, but only a fraction actually got interviewed by Digital. And there was a lot of banter at university about who would get a job with Digital, and I was one of the lucky ones.
So it was a very desirable thing.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. To get an into the computer industry in those days was quite a feather in your cap. A lot of people who were on my course ended up as electronic engineers. They joined companies like Plessey, Ferranti, whatever. Yeah.
And what was the kind of the status of getting a job at Digital? Was it kind of another step above that?
If you were a student at Essex University, it's a feather in your cap. Whether that's the same in the world at large, I don't know. I think people who knew anything about the computer industry, when you say you work for DEC, they're quite impressed. DEC had a very good reputation, and I think everybody who worked for DEC in those days was extremely proud to be there. It was a cultural thing, and actually, when I left in 1980, it was with a great sense of regret.
Okay, we'll come on to that. So tell me, you've come to Digital and you moved to Reading to work here?
Yes, in fact, I walked past the hotel that they put me up in for 2 weeks just now, and it brought back quite a few memories. They also put me up for another 2 weeks on the Basingstoke Road, because where I was working was Arkwright Road, and they put me up at what used to be called the Post House Hotel down near Junction 11 of the M4. They put me up, and I ended up sharing a house with another employee at Arkwright Road, so it all kind of worked out reasonably well.
So 2 weeks in the hotel. Why were you in
Well, 4 weeks actually.
4 weeks.
2 weeks in the centre of Reading and 2 weeks down near the motorway junction.
Is that as you were kind of finding your feet in Reading?
Yes, that's right. They would put me up for 4 weeks, which should enable me to find my own accommodation in the area.
How did you feel, like, fresh out of university, 21, you're going to work for this world's second largest computer company? How do you feel about that?
Oh, it was exciting. Yeah, it was great. What was particularly pleasing to me was that as soon as I got there, I was immediately accepted as part of the team, and we were all socializing, going up the pub on a Friday lunchtime, and that kind of thing. It was really quite a social environment, but hardworking as well. We kind of had an ethos. In special systems, we're a bit unusual in that we were project based and we had a project to do something. And really, the management only cared about one thing, and that is that you deliver the project on time. Whether, what hours you worked or whatever, whether you had to work weekends and so on and so forth, it wasn't a factor. You just had to get the job done. You could work hard and play hard, and we kind of reveled in that.
I mean, so let's talk about, you're with computer CSS at Arkwright Road. Describe the building. What does it look like?
I was down there the other day and took a few photographs. We started off with one building, and these were single story, I call them sheds. They were probably about 40 feet wide by, I don't know, 150 feet long. And typically they'd have a corridor that went from the front door all the way down to the end of the building. And there would be various offices off to the left and to the right. Freezing cold in the winter, as you can imagine. They were not much better than Nissen huts, if you know what they are. In the summer, they could be baking hot. They started off with one building, then they added a second and a third and a fourth as the business grew, and a fifth. I think I joined them when there were two buildings, and they got the third building shortly after. But yeah, it was. This is a very British thing, the sales and marketing people are always up front with shiny offices and nice cars, and the engineers are in the shed at the back of the garden. That's the way we work here, and that's the way it was with digital.
It sounds so. It's a series of shed-like buildings, Arkwright Road at this point.
Yes, it is, and it still is to this day. Yeah.
And is it what's the atmosphere like working in there? Because is everyone separate, or are they kind of joining together easily?
They're separate, and that was fine until the middle of winter, where you got horizontal weather, and it wasn't so much fun going from one building to another. But as I recall, one building was, if you like, for the senior management and the admin and the accounts people and so on and so forth. Another building was for the engineers. A third building was for the software people. And a fourth building was where we had what we called low volume manufacture. And what that was is if we designed something custom for one customer, but we found there was a market for it with other customers, we would then put it in low volume production. And so we wouldn't make thousands of these, but we would make tens or even hundreds. And so we had a dedicated group of people who did that for us. And we made a lot of revenue that way.
And there was a final building. Did you describe the final building?
Final building was a bit of a mishmash. It was a repair center and place where engineers would, do their testing and so on and so forth. So it was talk about wires across the floor. You would trip up every time you go in there. I mean, it was like a bird's nest on the floor. But when I was involved in one project, we had the back end of that building, and we fitted, I think it was 16 PDP 1134s on a network, and this system was being designed to do the process control of a truck tire manufacturing plant in what we now know as the Ukraine, but in those days was part of the USSR. They did actually ask me to go to a place near Kiev to commission the system, but I turned them down. Said no, thank you.
I've got to say, this sounds, describing the environment, what you've described to me, sounds more, I guess I put the question to you, is it more garage than the laboratory? Because
Oh
computers,
yes, garage, not laboratory.
yeah.
No, absolutely not laboratory. We
So,
weren't spotlessly clean, or, but we had the freedom to design bespoke kit to put officially on digital equipment in the field. And that was quite something, because normally computer companies do not want you tampering with their systems in the field. And we were the specialist organization that had the charter which enabled us to do that.
and you, where did the orders come from? Who told you to do this stuff? Did they come down from high? Was it collegiate decisions? How did you get the marching orders?
Well, gosh, I think I have to give you a bit of a story here, and that is digital started off by making printed circuit boards with discrete components on it. I'm talking capacitors and resistors and transistors, and each of these modules did a function. It could be an AND gate, an OR gate, or whatever. And digital had customers who we called OEMs, and they would get all these modules, put them in a rack, wire them up in a certain way to do a particular function. Okay, and from that, digital went on to develop its own computers. When I came along, PDP-8s were ubiquitous. Their original customers, the OEMs, were starting to use digital's computers and adapting them to do a variety of different functions. And more often than not, the OEMs would go to digital and say, look, we need to be able to connect this piece of exotic equipment to your computers. You've got to help us to do that. And so that's where the salesman, the digital salesman, the regular salesman, would contact a member of CSS called an application engineer. And that application engineer would take a look at what it would take to do what the customer wants, and they would quote the OEM for that. And then if the OEM says, yeah, that's fine, we'd get the job. Someone like me, a project engineer, would get the job to design this in this time scale to this cost. It's almost like a company within a company, if you see what I mean.
Was there anything you couldn't do? Anything where there was just nothing, you just couldn't build that custom system, it's too out there?
I think there must be a lot of things that customers wanted that we couldn't do in those days, for whatever reasons, technology reasons, cost reasons, or in those days when 4K chips were the norm, you couldn't do things that needed a meg. It's just not something that was economic to do. But I think most jobs that came our way were well within our capabilities, and I think we even tended, engineers being what engineers are, you get a job to do a certain thing, and you'd get halfway through it and you think, well, it wouldn't cost very much more to be able to add this to it, and it would double the capability, And so we did a lot of that, and a lot of these type of products went into low volume manufacturing. The most famous one that we did during my day was something called the VT30, and if you remember the old days of elections in the UK, and there was this concept of a thing called the swingometer. Okay, well, what we did was we were approached by ITN, and they wanted a digital swingometer, one that would show bar charts and graphs and, at the press of a button. And we enabled all of that on a color screen. You've got to remember, in those days, processing color was very difficult. Yeah, we managed to do that, and it was a great success story. In fact, low volume manufacturing couldn't keep up with the demand. As soon as ITN had it, and they blew away the competition, all the competition came along and said, we want one of them as well, or 10 of them, or however many.
Did that appear on a particular election broadcast? Do you remember what election year that might have been?
Well, it must have been whatever one was in the period between 74 and 80. So whichever one that was.
Well, it was 1979 election, and then there was
well,
one in 74 as
that,
well.
yeah.
So there was at least 2 elections it could have been.
No, it wouldn't have been the 74, because I would have just joined.
So
at that
79,
point. No.
that would be the Thatcher victory, 79. Interesting. So ITN had their digital swingometer thanks to your work at
Correct.
CSS. Where would they have gone after that? Who else wanted a swingometer after that? Was it just the technology people want to get into for use it for other things, our applications?
Do you know, I don't know. I wasn't too close to that side of the business, because they had focused me on peripheral interfaces. So if you wanted a particular tape drive to be interfaced to a PDP-11, I'm the man for the job. The lucky guys who were working with color graphics and so on and so forth obviously didn't want me.
What was your role in the swingometer? Did you have a role in that?
Not really, no. I had a role in demonstrating it to a number of customers. But no, I was not involved in the design or commissioning of it.
Can you think of it as any particular project or one you would call out that you did work on? You could say that one is a really memorable experience.
Well, there are 2 that springs to my mind, and you'll understand the reason for that. The first one was the first ever project I was given, and it was to interface to in those days, there was a data formatting thing from ECMA, which was the European Computer Manufacturers Association. It was called the ECMA 34 protocol. And Philips of Holland had come out with an ECMA 34 tape drive. And I was given the job, my first job that I ever did completely on my own. The standard tape drive for digital was called the TA11, and because mine was from Special Systems, it was called the TAS11, and I designed that pretty much from scratch. Yeah, it went out in the field, and we sold quite a lot of them, because being an ECMA standard, just about everybody needed to have it. So that to me was my first success, and therefore it sticks in my mind. The second one was the system, the big network system I was talking about earlier, for this Ukrainian tire factory.
Why was that so? Was that a particularly challenging project?
Because it was so big. It was such a big system, and it was networked.
How big are we talking?
With talking 16 network PDP-1134s, fully loaded. I mean, it stretched the limit of what the systems were capable of doing. And we had to interface CSS process control interfaces to that system, and to control, I don't know, you know, when you're making rubber tires, you have to squirt so much liquid rubber in, and it's measuring it and doing this, that, and the other. And it was so big that we had to go over to our plant. Digital had a plant in Ayr in Scotland, and I used to have to go up there for a week at a time, help with the commissioning of it all, because we commissioned it in Reading, but because it was such a big system, we couldn't house it, so we had to do it bit by bit. Of course, in Ayr, they had the space, so we could connect the whole system together and check that the whole system worked properly. And then, of course, it got shipped over to the Ukraine. And in those days, there were some difficulties shipping American high-tech equipment to Russia. We had to get special licenses and so on and so forth. But anyway, the kit was shipped over to the Ukraine. They asked me to go, and sorry, it never appealed to me to go to Russia. I come from Hong Kong, and I know what China was like, and I could just imagine that Russia was broadly similar, and I didn't want to go there.
Well, it sounds like the atmosphere, CSS. It sounds like it's very much a very thriving workshop and everything. How well, if at all, was it part of the DEC? Or was it a separate? Or did you feel separate out on your own? Did you feel part of something, the corporate culture? Did they have different cultures?
I think there was. I think different parts of any company have slightly different cultures. CSS. We love to have the best of both worlds. We love the idea of being part of DEC. You know, we are a part of DEC. But not only were we part of DEC, we were intensely proud that we were the renegades within DEC. We were the ones who did non-standard stuff, and we made it work, and we made customers happy. And at one stage, they said something like 60% of DEC's revenues from installations had some CSS content in it, which was, you know, I still think about that and think that's phenomenal. Yeah.
And was it a very young, you said you could work hard and play hard. I mean, you're coming at the weekends, which is kind of, it's very much a thing that happened now, but maybe I don't know if that happened in that era, but was it a young workforce there?
Very much. In fact, there was even a generation gap between the management and, if you like, the engineers. The engineers were all, I'd say, with one or two exceptions, below 30 years of age. In fact, when I first joined, I was assigned to a senior project engineer. And I learned an awful lot from him. He was a really good guy. In fact, I still see him at reunions these days. But we're all getting older, of course.
And was it a male environment? Or was it completely male? Were there kind of women in that environment?
I think we reflected the times, and yes, it was a male-dominated environment. There were plenty of women around, but they were kind of restricted to clerical jobs, administrative jobs, finance jobs. There were a couple of women in the wiring shop who did wiring. I don't recall any design engineers being female, apart from my predecessor, who then went on to other things within the company. But yes, it was very, and of course, in the drawing office where they drew up all the circuits and so on and so forth, that was dominated by women.
And did you travel over to what became Park and Park 1 and 2? Did you ever get onto the campus?
No. I think the move to DEC Park, or Wharton Grange, as I think they called it, occurred shortly after I left. I used to see it being built, but I never got in there. I did visit there on a subsequent occasion where Digital were a prospective customer of mine, but I never actually worked there.
What did you see? What did you think as you saw it being constructed? What did it look like?
You know, when you work for an organization like CSS in Arkwright Road, there's something very nice about being small and, knowing everybody. When everybody was put under one roof in this humongous building, it became somewhat impersonal. And that's not necessarily my view, because I didn't work there, but I still had lots of friends who worked there, and they said that was the overriding impression they had. It was just so big. I said, well, you like being part of a big company. Yeah, but we like being part of CSS, which is part of a big company. We don't want to be part of the big company as such. So,
And did you mix much? How did you integrate with Reading at all? I mean, you're in Arkwright Road. Did you feel distinct from Reading or part of Reading?
gosh, that's an interesting question. How much did I integrate with Reading? Well, I became a supporter of Reading Football Club, if that counts. But because I didn't live in Reading at the time, I started off in the hotels. Then I went to share a house with another employee of Digital's in a place called Thatcham, which is more Newbury than Reading. And from there, I shared another house, incidentally, which was owned by a DEC employee who got seconded to Massachusetts, and that was in Burfield Common. So we really didn't. I mean, Reading was our nearest shopping centre, but as young men, you weren't that interested in shopping. We were more interested in the local pubs, and yeah, that was our social life.
So we talked a little bit about the culture there, and how obviously at the end it reflected the times. There were a few number of women in the engineering department. Your predecessor, she'd been a woman at CSS. What was her name? And
Lynn Gillen.
And she moved on to.
She moved on within Digital. In fact, when I joined, I was given a toolkit, a digital toolkit, and engraved in the handles was Lynn.
Did you ever have the Digital Engineers watch as well?
Well, there were a number of promotional watches, but they were, trinkets.
There was a watch that I understand field engineers would have.
No,
that was
I wasn't
special.
Field engineer,
Okay.
no.
And did you see, we often hear a lot about the DEC culture, this concept of do the right thing, and they were very good at supporting, especially from the States, advancing, being positive and advancing people from like disadvantaged backgrounds. Did you see any sort of barriers or lack of barriers to advancement in DEC?
No, I never felt that. Number one, I'm not 100% Anglo-Saxon. Okay, that was never an issue. I'm half Chinese, by the way, hence the Hong Kong connection. I'm also disabled because as a child I had polio, so I had a problem with my left arm. And that had never been an issue for me. In fact, Digital were quite good. People at work knew if I was struggling to do something, and they would always help. Brian Higgs, the wire shop manager, would say, "Hey Ken, why don't you let one of my guys do that for you?" That kind of thing. It was all, everybody mucked in, and it was never a problem for me. In fact, if anything, it was an advantage, because I think towards the end of my tenure at Digital, there were the dreaded quotas, where Digital were required to have a certain percentage of people who were registered disabled and so on. And they asked me if, as I was disabled, would it be okay for them to use me as a, and to make up the numbers? And yeah, fine.
So how were they supportive in your day-to-day work being registered disabled? Because you're in a very physical role there at CSS, aren't you?
It's less physical than you would think. Obviously, moving kit around, but it was all the kit was on trolleys and that. If I had to lift heavy boxes, I wouldn't be doing that. Somebody else would do that, it was never a problem for me, really.
And were you aware of other programs to advance sort of people generally? I mean, there was also lots of management training, for example, weren't there? There was a ton of courses within the company. Did you ever witness that in action or want to take part in any of those programs?
I think that when I first joined, I was a junior engineer. towards the end of my tenure there, I was at a level, I was a project engineer, and they started to send me on. I mean, you know, as an engineer, you want to get on with your job. The last thing you want to do is to be sent off to Beaconsfield for a course for 3 days. You know, and I think looking back on it, I was quite resistant to that. But hey, maybe that's to my disadvantage. I don't know.
Well, it's interesting because DEC did have this culture, and it enabled engineers to jump into the business side as well, didn't it? Have this kind of two tiers track.
Well, you know, that was not my recollection. The reason I left digital was very simple, and it was material. It was about noticing that all the people who got paid lots of money and had nice cars were salespeople. And I asked digital if they would let me become a salesman. And they turned me down flat. No, you're an engineer, so you stay an engineer. And they were recruiting salesmen from universities and God knows what. And so it's a bit of a story, but I had gone to Stuttgart for digital to fix something, a piece of CSS equipment that had failed. And I was on a flight back, and sitting next to me was the marketing director of a computer printer company. And we were chatting away, and he said, anytime you're interested in a job, give me a shout. So the next thing I knew, I was working for him. Simply because I wanted to get into sales, to improve my lot. And the fact of the matter is, in my first year working for a new company, I earned double what I did at digital. And that's the discrepancy, if you like, between the sales and marketing, if you like, wages and the wages of an engineer in the UK.
But that opportunity wasn't open to you at DEC. They said no to it.
They said no.
Right. Any reasons ever given for that?
Yes. In those days, they weren't called HR. They were called personnel. And our personnel manager, Alistair Wright, I remember him looking me in the eye and said, Ken, you're an engineer. Get out of here.
But DEC liked that. They wanted engineers in a management business role, but they drew the line. Yeah.
Well, it wasn't a management role. I just wanted a sales role. And they said no. So, yes. But
so how did you feel? So you've left. You're on the way out, and this was a year. How did you feel? Because obviously you'd had some really great experiences, and there's great cultural fit, and there's great engineering culture at DEC. How did you feel now you're leaving the company?
Oh, it's scary. It's a real wrench, because I had some very, very good friends at work. We were all about the same age. And I still see some of them to this day. I mean, well, what are we talking? Nearly 50 years hence. And yeah, we still talk about the old days and how it was, and so on and so forth. So there is a kind of glue that sticks us together. It's still. But yeah, I have to say, some of the people I worked with worked for digital, then they got taken over by Compaq, then they got taken over by HP, and they are working for HP today. So they haven't really moved on at all.
But you're leaving, and you said, I think you said at the start, you felt sad to leave.
Very.
Why did you feel? Because it's rare. Most people leave when they're leaving a company. They feel good at I'm getting a better job. But you are moving to a better job, and you feel sad.
Well, there's that whole concept of starting over again in an alien environment. DEC was like a family, and it's like leaving your family for the first time to go out on your own. It's exciting, but it's really sad to leave your folks behind,
Why does it feel like a family?
Because of the culture there.
And how would you describe the culture? What was that?
I mean, we were just, we had each other's back. People would look after one another. People would help one another, and we would all socialize together. It was quite a regular thing for us. I joked earlier about going up the pub on a Friday lunchtime, but everybody went. It wasn't like, you know, a handful of people. It was like everybody. And we used to go up the top of the road. There was a pub called, I think it was called The World Turned Upside Down. And we thought that was that was a good name for a pub for people from Computer Special Systems.
So well, was that a CSS pub in particular?
Yes, it was. Yeah, we used to go there quite a lot. Yeah, and the fact that my life revolved around DEC, because the houses I shared in both Thatcham and in Burfield Common were with people who worked for DEC. So it was a common thread through everything.
And did you find DEC with departments drink in different pubs? So you've got The World Turned Upside Down. Would other DEC people go there, or did they go to other pubs around Reading?
Well, no, people, for example, who were down the road in King's Road, they would go to a local pub. They wouldn't go to one close to us. You would go to the one closest to you. As far as CSS was concerned, the only split I think there was, senior management went to a different pub to the workers.
This isn't it, because this is interesting, because the rest of DEC seems a little more integrated. The management would go out, would be at one with the work, but at CSS it seems like it's more an us and them sort of.
I mean, no. When I think about the senior management at CSS, they weren't that integrated with the people. Everybody knew of them, Bob McPherson and Eric Cocker and all these people. And they'd walk through once in a while and say, hello, how are you? You know, but they remained quite aloof. Yes, but amongst all the engineers, well, everybody else at the worker bee level, it was fantastic.
And so you're going to pubs together. Are you doing anything else together? Sporting events, concerts, gigs?
We used to do It's a Knockout things, and we used to do car treasure hunts, if you know what that is. You know, at the weekends, we'd have social events that we'd do. And of course, every year you'd have like your Christmas dinners, and we used to take over. I think we joined the rest of digital, and they used to have annual dinner dances at what was called the Top Rank in Reading, opposite the railway station. That was the one and only time we were really integrated into the rest of the company.
And how did you feel? Did you stand out as the engineers?
No, because there were so many people there from other parts of the UK who didn't know anybody either. It was, you know, it was simply getting everyone together, and the top brass, you know, Darryl Barbet and people like that would go and make a speech, and everybody would feel good about themselves and, yeah, get on with their jobs.
So you're going out at weekends and you're hanging out, travel anywhere out of Reading to destination?
I think I've already mentioned I travelled up to Ayr for work. I on occasion, like the flight I described to Stuttgart, because if a piece of CSS equipment failed, the regular field service engineers wouldn't be familiar with it and wouldn't know what to do. So we'd have to send our own people out, normally take somebody out of work and send them away for a day. I went to some rather strange places, the CEGB and Tewkesbury and you name it. I've been all over the country, and occasional trips over to the continent. Actually, I spent not only time in the plant at Ayr, but also in Galway, which was interesting. Going up to Ayr was wonderful because we used to go up there in the winter. They would put us up in the Turnberry Hotel, which is where the famous golf course is, and it was really plush. And of course, in the off season, it's really cheap.
Any great memories from up there? Stories?
We bumped into some famous golfers. I'm not a golf fan, so say, oh, that's so and so. Oh, really? Oh, all right.
And what about, you mentioned supporting the Reading Football Club. Did you watch them play at Elm Park or?
Oh yes, Elm Park quite a lot. Oh, I'll tell you the story in a minute. Elm Park, and then at Medeski. My son and I had been season ticket holders for over 20 years at Reading. Not doing so well now, of course, but yeah. But Elm Park. When I was at university, I was a member of two organizations. It won't surprise you to learn I was a member of the Union Technical Organization. And what that group of people did was we did the sound and the lighting for concerts, and we did discos and that. And from there, I went on to join URE, which was University Radio Essex, and we broadcast on 301 meters, medium wave band. Yeah, when I came to work for digital, I wanted to continue a little bit with the broadcasting. And as a consequence, I joined Hospital Radio Reading. At the time, its studios were in the bowels of Elm Park, the stadium. And in the winter, no heating, right? There was ice on the walls. It was awful. We moved to much better premises in Battle Hospital, and nowadays they're in Royal Berkshire Hospital. So with very plush, very professional looking kit. We were there with a couple of record players and a mixer, but yeah, no, it was very good.
And how was Reading doing back then? So what, talking 70s?
They were, oh gosh, it's hard to remember, second or third tier of English football. One match I always remember when they got, I think it was like the quarterfinals of the FA Cup, and they were drawn against Southampton, and it was a huge match, and tickets were changing hands at astronomical prices and so on and so forth. I went to see that. Reading didn't get through.
Okay.
So in a sense, I did integrate Hospital Radio Reading, Reading Football Club. Yeah.
How's Reading changed during that time? I mean, how did DEC influence it, do you think?
Oh, wow, that's a tough question. I think that Reading and digital were synonymous at one point, and I think digital helped to create, the Thames Valley corridor, the so-called Silicon Valley of the UK. I think because, and I don't know the story behind why digital came to Reading, but having done that and having established itself here, I think it attracted a lot of other high-tech companies, if I can put it that way, into this area.
Was it visible in the town? Could you see the digital influence in and around Reading at that point?
Not initially. I think that eventually digital started sponsoring things locally. Like I ran the Reading Half Marathon, and that was sponsored by digital, and you had digital plastered all over you. But in the town itself, people would have heard of Reading, would have heard of digital, but I'm not sure that they knew what digital did. Yeah. And
were you aware of, I suppose, we discussed how it was the world's second largest computer company. There was a line of people at Essex University wanting to get into this company, the feather in your cap. Once you're in that mix, how did it feel? Were you aware of this kind of your role of what DEC was and how you were changing customers? Because DEC, and I'll give you some, DEC has this famous slogan of do the right thing. I don't know how much, and do the right thing by the customer, by the employee, and so on and so forth. Did any of that ever filter down to your work in working with customers, or were you just...
Do you know, I'm not familiar with that. I don't know whether that was something that might have been coined after I left. So I don't know what what time span you're talking about. I'm not familiar with that. All I know is at CSS, it seemed to me, we didn't have a slogan, but you know, the old Nike thing, just do it, just seemed to apply to us. We'd make it happen if we possibly could.
And so, obviously, we know the rest is history. We know what happened to DEC ultimately. You've left the company by this point. How did you feel about that? You obviously read about it, or you heard about it from friends and colleagues. How did you feel about that?
I think my overriding emotion was sadness. Digital grew fantastically. It was on a exponential trajectory, and you know, some people were concerned it was growing too fast and so on and so forth. But I think the real problem was that DEC was being managed by senior staff, and Ken Olsen. You know, there's so many books on this topic, but there are some leaders who are good at starting companies. There are some leaders who are good at growing companies, and there are other leaders who are good at sustaining companies. You very rarely get one person that can do the lot. And I think that strategically, DEC missed the boat on so many things, including, and it should have known better, because DEC's philosophy in the early days was, well, with IBM, you have a central mainframe and everything's connected to it, right? Digital, we're talking about distributed processing. You have lots of little computers doing local jobs, and you communicate through a network. I mean, that sounds very modern, doesn't it? And when you think about the PC revolution that digital missed, it was all about, you know, having distributed computing. That's all it was. Instead of a PDP-11, you'd have a PC. And that completely ignored that.
So how did you feel about it? So you've had a lot of time invested in the company, haven't you? And you've left, but you're looking up from the outside. You're outside this company's going down. Were you surprised to see it happen? You read about it, people told you about it, or were you go, was it the fact Compaq bought it as opposed to anybody else?
All of the above. I still had lots of friends who were in DEC. I was still in the industry, so I read all the, you know, the media in you know, the magazines and so on and so forth. And it just seemed to me that at every turn, DEC missed the boat. And that's got to be down to the senior staff not being able to drive the company in the way it had to go to survive. They continued to want to be proprietary in a lot of their things, you know, their operating systems and their microprocessors and that, and really they got left behind.
The world had moved on.
Well, and you know, the ultimate shame is a young startup PC company called Compaq buys them.
Just tell me this then. What is your favourite? You've done a lot of work with DEC computers and systems. What was your favourite? Which DEC computer or system has your heart?
It's not a fair question, because I spent almost the whole of my career, all 6 years of it, in DEC working on PDP-11s. So I was Mr. PDP-11. PDP-11 has a place in my heart. I brought along today the PDP-11 programming card. You know, it was like, and the loader I'd memorized. You know, I could load it from the keys at the front without batting an eyelid. Yeah, it was the best mini computer of its day. And I had a lot of time for it. The software was pretty good, but they didn't open it up enough to enable what we nowadays call apps.
Okay. And do you ever, you're in the area, broadly speaking,
Yeah.
do you ever drive past Arkwright Road, still look at it?
It's quite a coincidence, but I had some time to kill the other day, having some work done on my car. So I was walking around, and I walked down to Arkwright Road, and I just reminisced for a few minutes, took a few photographs. The buildings haven't changed. One building has had the front modified, but it's still the same old buildings. They're still there. In fact, I went up to one building, I was looking at it, and the receptionist came out. She said, "What are you doing, sir?" And I told her. She said, "Reminisce as long as you want."
What do you feel about it when you see it? Or what did you feel? What feelings were going through your, or thoughts going through your mind when you saw that?
I was remembering people, in the sense that I'd look at a window and say, John Gorman's office, Bob McPee's office, Dennis Brown's office, and I was thinking where they all are now, or whether they might or might not still be with us, and so on and so forth. But I remember the good times there, and yes, as I say, I still meet people from CSS, even though they might live quite far away. I regularly see a guy called Ian Burton who lives up in Gloucestershire, but we often meet halfway. So he comes down to like Wantage or something, and we have a pint. Yeah.
What's the legacy of Arkwright Road and CSS?
CSS, I think its legacy has gone with the times. I think to me, the legacy is the people. There is still a bond, and it's such a strong bond, that when we have CSS reunions, there's one guy, he was a software guy, his name escapes me at the moment, who emigrated to Australia. But ever so often he comes back to the UK, and his arrival here is the stimulus for us to have another CSS reunion. And we'll go to a pub local in a place called Graiseley Green, the Old Bell, and which we used to go to when we were working for DEC, and we'd have a reunion. The last few reunions, we've had like 30 people there, which actually is pretty good. When you think that there were probably only about 50 engineers there. So yeah, the legacy is the people and the attitudes of those people. I think CSS itself doesn't have a legacy. All of its products are now consigned to the bin because they're 50 years old. And I suppose if it did anything, if 60% of DEC installations had CSS content, it really supported the growth of DEC in the UK. But, if that's a legacy, that's fine, but it's not something you say, oh, that's because of CSS, it's like, no.
That's quite a legacy, also 60%, because that means that you did a lot of business transformation. You empowered a lot of employees, a lot of companies, a lot of organizations.
Well, I remember talking to one of our application engineers, and he said, the sales force in digital love us, because when a customer comes up with an objection, you can't do this, he can say, oh, CSS can. So maybe that's a legacy. We help digital grow like it did in the UK.
And what's its legacy on you? What's it left for you?
Personally, I very much value the friendships I had. I very much value the culture. And that culture, I mean, it's a cliche, but it was all about teamwork. And I only worked for 2 subsequent companies after digital, and I brought that teamwork ethic with me, and I was always very successful at creating successful teams in the 2 companies I worked for. and I'm very proud of that. And I think that's because of the legacy I got from CSS.
That's great, Ken. I think that covers it.
Thank you.